안녕하세요.
The rain fell suddenly over Seoul, making the traffic even more chaotic. Amid the rush of pedestrians trying to shield themselves under umbrellas and awnings, Yu Ji-en, a determined and hardworking young woman, pressed her purse against her chest as she hurried up the steps of the imposing Kang Group building. It was her first day as a temporary employee in the marketing department, and the last thing she wanted to face was being late. Her racing heart, however, wasn't just from the rush, but also from the excitement of finally working at one of the country's most prestigious companies. After months of sending resumes, being rejected or ignored, this was her chance to prove she was capable. The main lobby of Kang Group was a spectacle on its own. The marble floor shone, reflecting the soft light from the large crystal chandeliers. Elegantly dressed employees rushed past, each immersed in their own tasks. The atmosphere exuded luxury and power, and Ji-yoon felt even smaller in the face of such grandeur. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the reception, determined not to show her nervousness. On the other side of the luxurious entrance hall, Kang Min-ho, the feared and respected CEO of the corporation, stepped out of the elevator with his impeccable suit and sharp gaze. Min-ho was known for his coldness and his unwavering dedication to business. For him, feelings were distractions, and love was a weakness he couldn't afford. Since a very young age, he had been shaped to inherit the family empire and expand it without hesitation. His grandfather, a strict and calculating man, had always taught him that the only thing that mattered in the world was power. In a hurry to avoid being late, Ji-yoon crossed the lobby without paying attention to her surroundings. Her high heel struck a small puddle of water that had escaped from the wet umbrellas of the arriving employees. In an instant, she lost her balance and fell forward, her purse flying from her hands. The impact was inevitable. "Oh, I'm sorry," she exclaimed, trying to regain her composure. Her heart raced as she realized she had bumped into someone. When she looked up, she met Min-ho's eyes. The shock hit her like a bolt of lightning. Silence hung in the air. The other employees watched the scene with wide eyes. No one had ever dared to bump into the CEO in such a way. Min-ho, for his part, stood still for a moment, feeling the unexpected touch and warmth of her body. Ji-yoon, mortified, repeatedly bowed, trying to find words to apologize. Min-ho looked down at the sleeve of his suit, now slightly damp and disheveled. His expression was unreadable. Any other employee would have been fired for much less. But for some reason, he couldn't feel anger. There was something about this woman, something that intrigued him. "Be more careful." His voice was firm, but not cruel. Min-ho adjusted his tie and, without saying anything else, continued on his way, leaving Ji-yoon relieved that she hadn't been fired on the spot. When she finally caught her breath, she bent down to pick up her purse and realized that everyone was still staring at her. Her face turned red. It was the first day, and she was already drawing attention for the wrong reasons. Sighing, she straightened her shoulders and walked to the reception to collect her badge. She needed to focus. She couldn't get distracted by the CEO, no matter how impressive his presence was. But something in him had changed. Min-ho tried to push the incident out of his mind, but the sincere and awkward expression of the young woman lingered in his thoughts far longer than it should have. Little did he know that this encounter would forever change the course of his life. The days following Ji-yoon's disastrous encounter with Kang Min-ho passed in a whirlwind. She did her best to avoid drawing attention, working diligently and steering clear of any situation that might put her in front of the CEO again. But fate seemed to have other plans. Min-ho, on the other hand, was troubled. He was a methodical, practical man who had never allowed anything outside of business to occupy his mind. However, since the incident in the lobby, Ji-yoon seemed to linger in his thoughts uninvited. It was frustrating. During a meeting with the board of directors, where they discussed strategies for the expansion of Kang Group, Min-ho found himself zoning out. He forced himself to focus, but with every pause, there she was again, appearing in his mind with those determined eyes and sincere expression. "President Kang, do you agree with the suggested approach?" One of the director's voices brought him back. Min-ho blinked, straightened in his chair, and responded firmly, But his own distraction irritated him deeply. He couldn't allow himself this kind of weakness. Meanwhile, Ji-yoon tried to adjust to the new routine. Her desk was near the building's panoramic windows, and she would lose herself in the view when she needed a break. During one of these moments, her teammate Soo-jin approached with a curious smile. "Have you heard the rumors?" she asked eagerly. Ji-yoon furrowed her brow. "What rumors?" Soo-jin glanced around, as if about to reveal a state secret. "They say President Kang has been acting different lately. Less cold, more distracted. And it all started after you got here." Ji-yoon's eyes widened, and she felt her face flush. "What? That's ridiculous. It can't be because of me." Soo-jin laughed. "I don't know, but if I were you, I'd be careful. The company's board wants him to marry someone influential. They would never accept him getting involved with a regular employee." Those words hit Ji-yoon like a bucket of cold water. She had no intention of getting involved with the CEO, but the idea that her mere presence could cause trouble bothered her. She needed to keep her distance. However, this decision proved impossible when, at the end of the day, Ji-yoon received an unexpected summons to the president's office. Her heart raced. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the top floor where Min-ho's office was located. When the door opened, he was there, sitting behind the desk, his expression unreadable. "Close the door, Monsieur." His voice was firm, but there was something different in his gaze. Something that made Ji-yoon hold her breath. What did he want with her? Ji-yoon felt a chill run down her spine as she entered Min-ho's office. The environment was sophisticated, dominated by dark tones and a massive glass wall that offered a breathtaking view of the city. The CEO watched her with an enigmatic gaze, his fingers interlaced on the desk. The silence hung heavily between them, until Min-ho finally broke the tension. "I've reviewed the reports from the marketing team and noticed your contribution to the last campaign. Your work was exceptional." His voice was controlled, but there was a hint of interest that surprised her. Ji-yoon blinked, confused. "Thank you, sir. I just did my job." Min-ho leaned slightly forward. "And you did it very well. I want you to work directly with me on the next project." Ji-yoon's heart skipped a beat. Working directly with Kang Min-ho? That meant frequent meetings, private conversations, everything she had been trying to avoid. However, refusing an order from the CEO was not an option. "Of course, sir. I will do my best." Min-ho nodded, satisfied, and leaned back in his chair. "Great, we'll start tomorrow. You can go now." Ji-yoon left the room feeling his gaze on her until the very last moment. As soon as the door closed behind her, she leaned against the hallway wall, trying to catch her breath. Soo-jin was right. Something was changing, and as much as she tried to ignore it, the idea of spending more time with Min-ho made her heart beat faster. That night, as Ji-yoon walked home, Soo-jin's words echoed in her mind. The board would never accept a romance between the CEO and a simple employee. She shook her head, scolding herself for even thinking about it. But deep down, a part of her already knew she was tangled in something much bigger than she had realized. On the other side of the city, Min-ho stared out at the lit-up cityscape from his penthouse, holding a glass of whiskey. He had never paid attention to any employee before. Why was Ji-yoon different? There was something about her that disarmed him, challenged his convictions. He was playing a dangerous game, but for the first time in years, he didn't want to back down. Little did he know, his decision to get closer to Ji-yoon would set off a chain reaction that would put everything he had built at risk. The next morning, Ji-yoon entered the meeting room with a folder of documents clenched between her fingers. Her heart raced as she saw Min-ho already seated at the head of the table, reviewing some reports. He lifted his gaze when she entered, and for a brief moment, an indecipherable glint flashed in his eyes. "Sit down, monsieur," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Ji-yoon took a deep breath and did as she was instructed. She tried to focus on the numbers, the charts in front of her, but his presence beside her was overwhelming. Throughout the meeting, Min-ho asked sharp questions, testing her knowledge, and she responded confidently, showing that she wasn't just there to follow orders. This seemed to intrigue him even more. When the meeting ended, Min-ho leaned slightly toward her. "I want you to accompany me on a business trip next weekend." We need to close an important deal, and your creative insight might be helpful. Ji-yoon swallowed hard. A trip? Alone with him? It seemed dangerously intimate. I'm not sure if I can, sir. He raised an eyebrow. This is part of the job. There's no room for hesitation. She sighed and nodded. Understood. As Ji-yoon left the room, she felt her head spin. She was getting too close to him, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, she was already feeling something she shouldn't. But before she could process her thoughts, she was taken by surprise by a familiar figure in the hallway. So, it's you? The cold voice made Ji-yoon shudder. She turned and came face to face with Kang Hyun-jae, Min Ho's older brother and one of the company's shareholders. He looked her up and down with a dismissive expression. I don't know what you did to catch my brother's attention, but let me give you a warning. Min Ho doesn't have time for irrelevant distractions. People like you don't belong in his world. Ji-yoon felt a knot form in her throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but Hyun-jae had already turned and walked away. His warning was as clear as crystal. That night, Min Ho received a call from his grandfather, Kang Dae-ho, the true patriarch of the family. I'm hearing troubling rumors about you and an employee at the company. I hope you know what you're doing. Min Ho gripped the phone tightly. I know exactly what I'm doing, grandfather. On the other end of the line, Dae-ho chuckled softly. We'll see how long that lasts. Min Ho hung up the phone and stared out at the Seoul skyline. He had always known that his family would never accept him following his heart, but for the first time, he was willing to fight. The business trip took place at a luxurious seaside resort in Busan. Ji-yoon tried to remain strictly professional, focusing on the contract they needed to close. However, Min Ho's presence was inescapable, and the tension between them grew with each exchanged glance. During dinner with the investors, Ji-yoon demonstrated her insight by suggesting adjustments to the marketing strategy, impressing everyone, including Min Ho. When the meeting ended, the two of them walked along the deserted beach under the moonlight. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotions. Have you always been this determined? Min Ho broke the silence, his hands in his pockets. Ji-yoon smiled slightly. I just do my job. He watched her for a moment before speaking again. And yet, it seems like you don't believe you belong in this world. Ji-yoon turned her gaze to the sea. Because I don't belong. People like me don't have a place in your circle, Mr. Kang. Min Ho suddenly stopped, grabbing her by the wrist. Stop calling me that. When we're alone, my name is Min Ho. Ji-yoon felt her heart race. She wanted to step back, but the intensity in his gaze held her in place. That doesn't change anything. Your family would never accept someone like me. Min Ho sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, and that's what frustrates me the most. He took a step back, as if trying to restrain his own feelings. But I can't help it. Before Ji-yoon could respond, his phone rang. It was his grandfather, Kang Dae-ho. He stepped aside to take the call, and Ji-yoon felt a tightness in her chest as she overheard the patriarch's stern tone. You're making a mistake, Min Ho. If you continue with this, you could lose everything. The company, your status, even your name in the family. Are you willing to throw it all away for a mere employee? Min Ho clenched his fist. He knew this moment would come, but the pain of hearing it spoken aloud was more intense than he had expected. He looked at Ji-yoon, who was watching him with uncertainty in her eyes. What would he choose? His legacy or his heart? That night, Ji-yoon stayed in her hotel room, lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was torn. She knew that Min Ho was fighting against his own family for her, but was it worth it? Was she doomed to be nothing more than an obstacle in his life? The words of Min Ho's brother and the patriarch still echoed in her mind. People like you don't belong in his world. Min Ho, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. He stood on the hotel balcony, staring out at the rough sea. He had never questioned his family's orders before, never felt that he could challenge the expectations placed upon him. But now, everything seemed different. He didn't want to follow the path his family had chosen for him. For the first time, he wanted something for himself. He wanted Ji-yoon. The next day, as they boarded the flight back to Seoul, Min Ho made a decision. He grabbed Ji-yoon's hand before she could pull away and whispered, "No matter what happens, I won't give up on you." Ji-yoon felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she couldn't say anything. The battle had only just begun. The following days in Seoul were chaotic. As soon as Min-ho and Ji-yoon returned from the business trip, rumors about the two of them spread throughout the company and high society. The shareholders were uneasy, and the press began to suspect. The pressure on Min-ho grew with every meeting with his family. "You can't be this naive, Min-ho." Kang Hyun-jae, his older brother, slammed his hand on the glass table in the meeting room. "If you keep insisting on this madness, the board could remove you as CEO. Then let them try." Min-ho retorted, his voice firm. "I won't allow my life to be dictated by you." The tension within the Kang family reached its peak when Kang Dae-ho, the patriarch, summoned Min-ho for a private meeting. In his large and imposing office, Min-ho faced the man who had always ruled his life with an iron fist. "Have you forgotten everything we've taught you?" Dae-ho asked with a severe look. "If you continue with this relationship, you will lose everything. I will make sure of it." Min-ho took a deep breath. "If losing everything means living my life according to what I believe, then I accept the consequences." The grandfather chuckled softly, but his gaze was dangerous. "Do you think love pays the bills? That love will keep this company standing?" "Min-ho, you were born to lead, not to get distracted by childish dreams." But Min-ho was resolute. "I'm not giving up on the company, but I won't give up on her either." Meanwhile, Ji-yoon kept her distance. She saw the headlines, heard the whispers in the office, and felt the pressure mounting on Min-ho. As much as she loved him, she knew she was disrupting his life. She made a painful decision to resign. The next day, she left an envelope on his desk. Min-ho found the letter, and as he read it, his heart tightened. "Min-ho, I know you're fighting against everything and everyone for me, but I can't let you lose what you've built. You were born to lead, and I am just an obstacle in your path. It's better this way." Min-ho wouldn't accept it. He left everything behind and went after her. He found her at the exit of the company, holding a box with her belongings. Without hesitation, he grabbed her wrist, his eyes burning with determination. "If you think you can make this decision alone, you're mistaken." He pulled Jaeyeon close, gazing deeply into her eyes. "I love you, and if I have to choose between an empire and you, I choose you, always." Ji-yoon felt the tears spill. "But what about your family?" Min-ho smiled faintly. "They'll have to accept it, or they'll lose me too." Time seemed to stop. Ji-yoon saw the sincerity in his eyes and knew there was no longer a fight to be had. She didn't need to run. They could face everything together. The following month, Min-ho publicly announced their engagement, shocking the press and the business circle. Despite the initial resistance, the board realized Min-ho's determination was unshakable. Slowly, even his family was forced to accept it. A year later, under a starry sky and in front of hundreds of guests, Ji-yoon walked down the aisle with Min-ho by her side, and when they exchanged their vows, they knew they had won. Against all odds, they had chosen love. And that was the right choice.